More than 20 years ago, I started teaching logic, but time and again I felt that my students found it too difficult to understand and solve syllogisms and exercises in propositional calculus, and then I thought that maybe the problem was in the logic books, but not in my students. So I set out to develop logic diagrams capable of pointing out each and every one of the steps to follow during reasoning, and the result was, for me, a paradigm shift in logic. Marlos diagrams and Marlos networks of expectations are tools for teaching logic included in the doctoral thesis Marlos logic diagrams for visual and heterogeneous reasoning. These diagrams are complex but not complicated, essentially when we work with children with no prior knowledge of logic. With them, I have really improved the logical performance of my students in a spectacular way, both with syllogisms and with the propositional calculus. Marlos logic diagrams are based on common sense. In the process of their constructions, I have worked with children from 12 to 16 years old, always trying to integrate and coordinate different forms of reasoning. But perhaps the greatest innovation is that in Marlos diagram, any inference of first-order logic is explained as a syllogism. That is to say, we always look for the middle term of propositions. This makes it easier for students to understand the processes that lead from premises to conclusion. In 2017, I discovered that the way I understand propositions and inference in my diagrams is very similar to the postulates of the doctrine of the quantification of the predicate, which was one of the most important attempts to broaden the scope of the Aristotelian syllogism. The quantification of the predicate had been condemned in the 13th century by Aristotelian logic because, according to orthodoxy, only subjects can be particular. But despite this condemnation, the doctrine of the quantification of the predicate became very popular in the 19th century. Remember, that was followed by authors such as William Hamilton, Stanley Gibbons, or George Boole, the father of mathematical logic. However, Ben criticized this doctrine in symbolic logic, denying that Boole had been influenced by it in any way. In the late 19th century, the logic of class of Ben was victorious, and the quantification of predicate fell into oblivion. Mathematical logic proclaimed its independence from the Aristotelian tradition and sought its own origins in Stoic logic. But we believe that another way of understanding logic was possible, more related to common sense and the philosophical tradition. In fact, the first logic machines were built from the paradigm of the quantification of the predicate. In Stanhope, Gibbons, Boole, and the Marlo diagram, affirmative and negative propositions are conceived as an equality of part or all of one variable with another. Now, the exclusion is not a primitive of the propositions, but only of the inferences, which are nothing more than syllogisms. Marlo diagrams integrate uncertainty as a natural part of reasoning processes, and they do so in a simpler way than other classic diagrams such as Peirce or Venn. It is important to note that Venn diagrams must exhaustively represent all the possibilities in play, which make it impossible to represent arguments with more than 5 variables clearly. However, Marlos diagrams only represent the significant combinations that are necessary to change the reasoning from the premises to the conclusion. In this way, a greater parallelism between the graphic representations and the steps that are part of verbal reasoning are achieved. This way of proceeding allows us to clearly and simply show the conclusion of arguments with a large number of premises. Keep in mind that Marlos diagrams are simple because they focus on the necessary associations that the premises implicitly establish, while other diagrams such as Peirce are based on making explicit the relation that those same premises establish as impossible. Also, unlike Venn diagrams, Marlo diagrams allow you to represent and solve arguments with intermediate quantifiers such as most, half, or a few. Thus, through the deletion of what it is relevant and integrating uncertainty, Marlo's diagram allows conclusion to be reached in a clear and distinct, simple and economical way, using cognitive shortcuts that go beyond the exhaustive elimination of possibilities. Because of this, Marlo's diagrams allow the development of skills such as mental flexibility that are essential for the improvement of reasoning and critical thinking. It cannot be a simple coincidence that our diagram allows us to establish links between the figures of the Aristotelian syllogism and the figures of the inference postulated by George Boole. A web version of Marlo's diagrams had recently been developed by the professor of logic at the University of Seville, Fernando Soler Toscano. Now, you can practice all the operations necessary to graphically represent and solve syllogisms and propositional logic. A multitude of exercises with progressive difficulty and numerous examples are available to the user. To reach a conclusion from the premises, we must first create models of the propositions based on the quantification of the predicate. We then need to match the subjects of our diagrams by identifying the middle term and converting or transforming the diagrams. We can synthesize in a single model all the information contained in propositional models with the same subject. After this, convert the diagram obtained by inference to present the conclusion from the term you prefer. And finally, if we eliminate the middle term from the representation, we can clearly see the total partial relations that are established between the rest of the variables in play. We recommend reading the instructions, practicing the exercises, and running classic examples to open your mind to a new perspective of reasoning. We are sure that this innovative tool will be useful to understand the constitutive processes of reasoning and the mental models with which neural networks communicate information through verbal propositions.